Whenever someone asks me to describe myself, I always begin by saying, I have my father's nose. When I was younger, he would take his fingers and squeeze my nose, and he would tease me by asking, why did you have to take my big nose? And you could have taken your mother's pretty nose? And I, of course, a child, not knowing that I had a choice in the matter, would laugh. And he would smile too, of course. And it was the smile that told me that he was in fact proud that he could see his own nose on my face. My nose made me his child. It wasn't a competition, of course, but I took a lot of attributes from my mother as well. The day I learned I had my mother's mouth, it was haircut day. I was 15 and I hated haircuts. And I was just getting into my beard and mustache. So I was like, I'll ask the barber to shave the beard, leave the mustache. So I got home feeling fresh, looking good. And my daddy, as soon as I come in, he says, come here. So I walk up to him, and he takes my chin into his hands and turns my head to either side. And he says, did you make him shave off the mustache? And I say, no, I just asked him to neaten it. And he was like, oh, okay. Because it almost made your lips look like some other kind of lips. So I was like, Dad, I can't, please stop. But that was my father, right? And in the end, of course, he blamed me for taking my mother's mouth. And it was like this all through childhood. All through childhood, whatever we did, my brother and I, they would be quick to assign those attributes to themselves. They would say things like, you got that from your father, you know. And then if we did something bad, they would quickly say to each other, talk to your child. And then in instances when there was something unfamiliar, they would be like, where did you get that from? My father passed away on February 1st of this year. So that my consideration of myself as a composite of my parents made me feel like I had lost actual parts of myself. I began looking for vestiges of him in different places. What had he left me? What had I inherited? I had his clothes, but I couldn't fit in them. My brother had his car because I couldn't drive. And I didn't live in Trinidad and Tobago anymore. I was interested in him. It was when I stood in front of the mirror that I recognized that he left me his nose, these shoulders and hands, my feet. And in my memory, I had inherited parts of his story. So in Trinidad, after a person dies, before the week of the funeral, we always have wakes. And at these wakes, family members would come through and we would share stories and memories of the person we've lost over rum and coke or browned rice with peas or chicken foot soup. So one of these wakes, I was making cheese paste to go with some salt crackers with my mother. And she told me the story of the birth of my brother. On that evening, she had just made Zwade, and that's my brother, and Dad had come in his gray starched shirt. His pants were seamed and his boots shone like pitch. He was a police constable, so this was his uniform. And he looked as intimidating as the law. In his hands, the same hands that held guns at times and handcuffs, he held a single rose. The nurses, when he came in, asked him, they said, where are you going with that? Are you going to lock somebody up with that rose? And all he could do was laugh and hand my mother the rose. In another instance, at one of these wakes, I was making curried dumplings with my auntie, Auntie Lynette. And this is Dad's younger sister. And he always used to tell stories of how she and him used to run around and pick mangoes. This was one of the instances where they used to pick mangoes, and they were trying to pick these mangoes by throwing stones at the tree. But it was unsuccessful, so my daddy said, okay, let's climb the tree. And he runs up and starts climbing this tree. And my Auntie Lynette, of course, follows. Brother and sister picking mangoes. At one point, my Auntie Lynette calls out to him. She says, Tony, I'm not seeing any mangoes, Can you throw down some for me? And Daddy says, yes, let me reach and get one for you. And she hears the rustling in the leaves, and her mouth is, watering. And so he says, all right, you're ready to catch? And she stretches her hands out, ready to catch. She says, yes. What she thought was my father reaching for the mangoes was actually my father pulling his pants down and squatting. So that the fruit she ended up catching wasn't quite what she expected. It's my dad. So I gleaned a lot in these I gleaned a lot in these weeks about the father that I didn't know, the father that existed before me and with other people. I learned that he would often imitate Muhammad Ali for his sisters. I learned that he was a storyteller. I learned that he never wet his bed, but once peed in my grandmother's plate. As I began to write his story, I realized immediately that I could not do it alone. Even though I had inherited his story, other folks held parts of his story as well. Roger Reeves says that to love is to press one frame against another. And even when a finger is found between this pressing, to press nevertheless. All of our lives are seen through frames. And the act of storytelling is an act of love. It is choosing frames and pressing them together. In the process of writing, I searched for my father everywhere. I spoke to cousins and aunties. I looked at pictures. And then I remembered that we had a group text. So I was looking through these group texts and I found his voice recordings. One day at Val in the dining hall. It had been months since I had heard his voice, and it was almost unfathomable to me to think that I could. So I played it. And in that moment, I could see all these faces, but none of them were quite the face I wanted to see. The moment was too intimate, and so I had to leave. I went to my room to spend time with him. This voice, the only thing left of my father. And I listened to him ask me how I was doing, what I had done that day, and tell me that his day was so much better because he had me to talk to. All of our stories are like this. Nowadays, at least, technology holds part of those stories as well. Daily, we are constructing ourselves in social media and in digital technology. For instance, I recently shared this on Facebook. If anybody knows me, they know that this is actually my autobiography. It's the most essential thing about my life. Yeah, it's me. I also shared this. This meme actually changed my life because I now greet some of my friends like this. All right? And this last meme is one I originally created in Thanksgiving. It was inspired by the first one. And I think we all can identify with this post-Thanksgiving meal feels and the inner us that tells us to eat more food just because there is. So the ways in which I can share these on social media, have them validated through likes and comments, indicates that the story I choose to share, the story I choose to present, is also in collaboration with the people I present those stories to. They can also tag me in things. For instance, one of my cousins recently tagged me in this picture, and the picture read, "Tag your cousin with the biggest teeth." So thank God Facebook has the option to remove tags. I have big teeth, but I was actually appalled by this. So I just removed removed the tag. And that taught me that I had the ability to choose, right? To choose which story I wanted to present. And we do this daily. Some of us choose to present a politically involved self through digital technology. Some of us choose to present a more vulnerable side. Some choose to present, a kind of Martha Stewart aesthetic, or what have you. In the same way, even though we inherit certain things, we can choose the story that we want our lives to become. For instance, my father, when my brother and I were born, he chose to stay. He chose to work arduously, from police work to construction work to taxi work, in the pursuit of making us and making our lives better than he could have ever imagined. In the end, he chose the unfathomable, to take his own life. But even that was a catalyst. Even that choice brought me here and compelled me to write his story. That choice is a part of his story inasmuch as it transforms my own. When I tell his story, I tell of that choice, but I also tell of the storyteller that reenacted Muhammad Ali, the mischievous picker of mangoes, the father, the policeman with the single rose. So that when anyone asks me to describe myself, I now describe myself as my parents' child, a Trinbagonian, a product of love, an artist, a young man with my father's nose.